Cowboy accepted an Apache slave as payment, only to discover she was Chief's daughter. The wind rolled low over the dusted hills, whispering through brittle grass like a warning no one could hear. Morning hadn't warmed yet. The sun hovered just beneath the earth, casting a pewter blue across the open stretch of land. An old barn sagged at the edge of nowhere, weather-beaten and grey, held up more by memory than nails. A crow perched on the rusted roof, quiet, watching. Jude Carver stepped out of his cabin with a worn coffee cup and a limp in his left leg that still remembered the war. His hat shadowed half his face, hiding eyes that didn't look for much anymore. Life had peeled him raw years ago. Now he just worked the soil, fed the horses, and stayed out of trouble. He didn't expect company, not this far out. The wagon came slow, pulled by a mule older than sin. A white man drove it, fat, sweating, eyes darting like someone with too much guilt in his chest. He didn't speak much, just handed over the burlap sack of grain, then jumped down and said, "Payment's short. Took this off a raid. She's yours now." Jude looked to the back of the wagon. There, curled like a trapped animal, was a girl, maybe 17, skin the color of sun-baked earth, barefoot, wrists tied. Her long black hair fell over her face, but he saw the blood dried near her temple. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stared up at him, hollow, burning. "What the hell is this?" Jude muttered, but the man was already turning the mule around, mumbling, "Fair trade, cowboy," before disappearing down the path. Jude stood there, coffee forgotten, heart caught between anger and disbelief. The girl didn't move. She just sat, bones sharp under thin skin, looking at him like she'd already lived through hell and wasn't expecting this stop to be much different. The wind kicked again, the crow took off, and Jude, for reasons he didn't yet understand, stepped forward. She didn't speak, just sat there on the edge of the porch where he'd untied her wrists. Her eyes followed the horizon, like she was still waiting for someone to come back, but deep down, knew no one would. She hadn't cried, hadn't begged. Even when Jude had offered her water, she only held the cup with shaking fingers and drank without meeting his eyes. He watched her from the shadow of the doorway, arms folded, jaw clenched, like he was holding back more than words. Something about the way she sat, still, rigid, like a bird that had forgotten how to fly, gnawed at something buried in his own bones. That look. He'd seen it before. Years ago, in a church basement overseas, a little boy, hiding behind pews after the gunfire, stopped, too quiet, too broken to run. Jude had carried that boy out, wrapped in his coat. The weight felt the same now, not in his arms, but in his chest. He wanted to ask her name, but didn't. Not yet. Her ankles were scraped raw from the ropes. There was dried mud on her knees, and something in the way she held herself told him she'd been pushed, dragged, maybe worse. His hands twitched, not out of anger, but hesitation. He didn't know how to be gentle anymore, not after everything he'd done to survive. She hadn't moved in hours, just watched the wind pass through the dying grass. "You ain't mine," he muttered to himself, turning away, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled more than he admitted. Not my fight. But she was still there, not leaving, not crying, just being, like a ghost who refused to disappear. He thought of leaving her near the trading post, or maybe taking her to the reservation line, dropping her off without a word. It'd be easy. No questions, no trouble. But as the smoke curled around his hat brim, Jude looked at her again, and saw it. The pride she was trying to hold together. The silence she used like armor. The same damn silence he'd worn for years. He crushed the cigarette under his boot and stepped toward her. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Ain't safe out there." She didn't nod, didn't thank him, but for the first time she blinked slow, and it almost looked like trust. The next morning brought heat instead of comfort. Jude was chopping firewood behind the barn when he heard the distant hooves. Not many, just 2, maybe 3 horses. But the rhythm wasn't right. Too slow, too deliberate. Men riding with a reason. He walked to the ridge near the road, keeping low. Dust rose in the distance like a warning before a storm. 3 riders, all white men, dressed like ranch hands but carried rifles like they were used to spilling blood. One had a red bandana around his arm, soaked with something darker. They didn't stop at his property, just passed by slow, eyes scanning like hawks looking for a weak rabbit. Jude knew their kind, hired hands with loose morals, men who worked for coin, not cause. Back at the cabin, the girl was still inside, sitting cross-legged by the hearth. She didn't ask questions, but her hands trembled as she braided her own hair, the way Apache women did when they were mourning. He leaned on the doorframe, watching. Who were those men? She didn't answer. He walked closer, knelt slowly, leveling his eyes with hers. They looking for you? This time she nodded. Once. Then pulled something from the folds of her worn dress, a carved wooden pendant, shaped like a hawk in flight. Apache chief's mark. Jude stared. His throat dried. You're not a slave, he said, voice rough. You're someone they're scared of. She looked down, ashamed, like the truth weighed more than the chains had. Then, slowly, she whispered. First time he heard her voice. My father is dead. They want to make sure I disappear too. Jude stood up fast, heart racing now. The men weren't random. They were cleaners, the kind sent to erase bloodlines, not collect debts. The slave had never been for tea. Raid. She was supposed to vanish. And now she was here. With him. He walked outside, scanned the hills again. The riders were gone. For now. But they'd be back. And they wouldn't knock. Jude hadn't picked a side in years, but this girl had no one left. And something about her silence, her fire, reminded him of people he failed to protect when it mattered most. He saddled the horse, loaded his Winchester. Time was short. And the noose around them was pulling tight. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in rust and gold. Jude lit the fire pit outside and handed her a tin bowl filled with beans and rabbit meat. She didn't eat fast, just carefully, like each bite needed permission. He didn't rush her. They sat apart, but the silence between them was softer now. Not empty, just full of things neither knew how to say. The next morning, he handed her the .22 rifle. Small, worn, but still clean. She hesitated, fingers brushing over the cold barrel like she was remembering something old. He didn't speak, just showed her where to hold, how to breathe, how to let the wind move through you before you pull the trigger. The first shot missed, the second hit a rock, the third, a tin can rolled off the fence. She didn't smile, but she looked at him, and her eyes held something close to light. Later, as they patched a hole in the barn roof, she pointed to the scar on his arm, a jagged burn that trailed from elbow to wrist. He paused, looked down at it, then said, "Firefight. Somewhere far." She didn't ask more, just rolled up her own sleeve and showed a faded welt across her shoulder blade. Rope burn, old, deep, no words needed. At dusk he found her brushing the horse, the one that didn't let strangers close, but now it stood calm under her hand, as if recognizing a kindred soul. He watched from the porch, arms crossed, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the pink sky. "She got a name?" he asked quietly. The girl looked back, nodded once. "Ashwi. What's it mean?" She paused, then whispered, "Rain that never comes." Jude felt something twist in his chest. That night, she sat beside the fire inside. No ropes, no fear. She ran her fingers over an old map he'd pinned to the wall. Trails, rivers, old towns. Her fingertips stopped at a place called Dead Elk Ridge. He watched her eyes grow distant, far away. "That where you're from?" She nodded, then added, "Where my mother died." He didn't ask how. Instead, he pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and for a long time they sat together, the flames dancing, the shadows soft. No danger in the room, no past in the air, just two broken people sharing the quiet, as if for a moment the world had stepped outside to let them breathe. The dogs barked just before dawn, not the usual restless whine. This was full-throated, furious. Jude was up before the second bark. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the front window, careful not to breathe loud. 3 horses, same riders, only this time they weren't passing through. They stopped in front of the barn, one man stepping down, shotgun in hand, spurs clicking like death's countdown. The red bandana was still there, but now his face was uncovered, scars across his cheek, eyes hollow as a broken bottle. "You got something don't belong to you," the man called out, voice calm like a preacher reading a death sentence. "That girl's property." Jude stepped out slow, rifle at his side. "She ain't property," the man smirked. "She was taken from a raid. Spoils are spoils. You know the code." Jude didn't answer. He just looked past them, to the trees, to the sky, to the choice he already made. Ashwi stood behind him now, barefoot, holding nothing but the pendant of her father clutched tight in her fist. Her eyes weren't scared, just tired of running. "I ain't giving her back," Jude said, low, steady. One of the other men cocked his rifle. The first shot came fast, cracked the wood beside his head. Jude rolled off the porch, fired back, clipped a shoulder, then chaos. Horses reared, fire spat from barrels, the air filled with dirt and noise. One of them got to the porch, kicked the door in. Ashwi was gone. Jude ran through smoke and pain, caught the man just before he entered the barn. They fought hard, close, dirty, fists, blood, teeth. Jude slammed the man's head into the beam and didn't look back. When he reached the barn, he found Ashwi crouched in the hayloft, aiming his revolver with both hands. She hadn't fired yet, but her eyes were stone. Then came the twist. A 4th rider, late arrival, quiet, dismounted behind the barn. He wasn't hired muscle. He wore Apache bone jewelry and a U.S. Marshal badge. Jude froze. "You're protecting her?" the man asked coldly. Jude didn't lower the rifle. "You know who she is?" The man nodded. "That's why she can't live. She's the blood that could unite both sides. Her father was about peace. That scares powerful men." Jude felt his world tilt. This wasn't just a bounty. It was politics, control, erasure. "I don't care about your cause," Jude growled. "She's staying alive." The marshal raised his pistol. A single shot echoed. Jude didn't move for a second, eyes wide. But it wasn't him who fell. Ashwi had fired. Her hands shook. Tears ran, but she held the gun firm. The marshal lay still. The other riders fled. Silence returned, heavy as grief. Jude dropped to one knee, breath ragged, the cost of protection weighing heavy in his chest. He had chosen her, and she had chosen to fight. Smoke still clung to the rafters of the barn, curling in lazy shapes like the ghosts of what had just happened. Blood stained the dirt near the threshold, not in pools, but in trails. Jude stood beside the marshal's lifeless body, not proud, not shaken, just hollowed out like a man who'd buried too many truths. Ashwi stood a few feet away, revolver loose in her hand, eyes fixed on the ground. She hadn't moved since the shot. Her lips were parted, but no sound came. She breathed through her nose, slow, shaky. Each breath was a fight of its own. No words were spoken. They wrapped the body in an old feed sack. Jude tied it with rope and hauled it into the back of the wagon. The sun had risen, casting a pale light that made everything look older than it was. They buried him on the edge of the property, not out of respect, but because the earth was soft there. Jude didn't say a prayer. Ashwi placed a single hawk feather on the shallow mound. The wind carried it for a moment before laying it down gentle. Back at the cabin, Jude packed supplies: jerky, water, bullets, a map. Ashby didn't ask where they were going. She just helped, folding blankets, brushing the horse, wrapping the pendant around her wrist like armor. He looked at her once, just once, and saw something different. Not lighter, not healed, but steadier. Like she had taken the pain and rooted it in her spine. They rode out before noon. No one chased them. No one watched. Just the land, wide and quiet, letting them pass like two ghosts slipping through the cracks of history. Ashby rode behind him for a while, then next to him. Her shadow stretched long beside his. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled. The sky was clear, the earth scarred but breathing. And as the cabin disappeared behind them, so did the life that had nearly taken them both. Seasons changed without asking. The hills turned green, then gold, then bone-dry. Snow came once, soft and brief, like a memory that didn't want to stay too long. The world kept moving. Trains still ran, men still lied, fences still rose. But somewhere beyond all that, Jude and Ashby built something unspoken. They settled near Red Bluff Ridge, miles from any trail. A small cabin stood beneath the shadow of pine, made of old timber and new hands. Ashby tended a garden. Jude worked with horses again, not to sell, but to heal. There were no visitors, no questions, only quiet. He never asked about her father again. She never asked about the war. Sometimes at dusk, they'd sit on the porch, 2 mugs, 1 fire, no words. One spring, she carved a stone and placed it under the tallest cedar tree. No name, just a hawk etched into the surface. He didn't ask who it was for. He only helped her place it straight. Years passed like a slow river. Ashby grew taller in her own spirit. She laughed now, not often, but enough to prove the past hadn't killed everything. Jude, too, softened in the edges. His limp stayed, but the bitterness faded. His eyes, once always scanning, now paused long enough to watch leaves fall. One evening, a letter arrived, carried by an Apache boy on horseback. Ashby read it, folded it, then burned it without a word. Jude didn't ask. Some things deserved flame more than memory. And when he grew older, slower, she stayed. Not as a daughter, not as a debt, but as someone who had once needed saving, and now quietly saved him, every single day. The land held their story like breath held in a lung. No one told it. No one needed to. But when the wind blew just right through the ridge pines, it carried a sound like hoofbeats fading, and the faint cry of a hawk, circling high above a cabin built by silence and survival. Some people don't leave behind names, just echoes that never stop traveling.